Well, good morning, good afternoon. If you're tuning in from the Eastern time zone in the United States or Canada, good evening if you're tuning in from England, Europe, or the Middle East, and a very, very late good evening to our friends from India and the Philippines who are tuning in now. It is my pleasure to be with Tim Page-Bottorff. He is so far, anyhow, Tim, the most listened to guest we've had on Larry Wilson Live. And we're going to be talking today about humor in safety. And I was just saying to Tim before the show started, I said, Tim, I know it's a little out of order from the questions and sequence I gave you, but the idea here, everybody, is not to try to turn this into a stand-up comedy routine. It's just to be able to bring more engagement, get people to listen to you so that the real message that you want to get across or get through comes through. I know you may have read this in the intro blurb, but I can remember years ago this old timer saying to me, "There's nothing funny about people getting seriously hurt, Larry." And I remembered looking at him going, yeah, well, you don't learn a whole lot when you're sound asleep either, knucklehead. I mean, and this guy was the other thing too about the Sermon on the Mount and the waggy finger and the nobody ever comes to work planning on getting seriously hurt stuff is that turns everybody off and disengages them really quickly. Whereas you can hear a session that Tim is doing down the hall, like 100 yards from where he's doing the session, and you'll hear people laughing, and you will want to know what the heck is going on in that room. I mean, this is safety training. Why are these people laughing? So, Tim, excuse me, everybody. First of all, thanks very much for taking the time out to talk with us today. I believe you are in Salt Lake City doing some training, and this may be your lunch hour or something like that. You're taking off.
Yeah, I'm in Salt Lake City doing some work for a customer here, and you're right. The whole fact of humor and safety is I could just actually say it out loud. I'd say to everybody, I'm a safety professional. I'm not a comedian. That actually gets some laughs right away. But to say that I'm a safety professional versus being a comedian, it kind of just sets the tone. And you're right. If you're going to come into a session like that,
I thought you were actually going to say, I'm a safety professional and I'm not really all that funny.
Well, that's true too.
Well, no, but I mean, this is one of the things that I don't know how I was going to get this out to everybody, Tim, is that you're not a comedian, okay? Like in terms of, having that whatever natural flair, that timing or whatever. We used to all make jokes about you on the workshop team going, you could give Tim a line no matter what it is, and he'd botch it up. And yet you would have more people laughing and engaged when you opened up the workshops, when you opened up the session than anybody else. And the anybody else includes me, everybody. So I'm not saying this lightly. And I've been using humor to survive for 30 plus years, talking to people about safety and their behavior. But just very quickly, everybody, Tim has a master's of science. He's a certified safety professional, certified industrial technologist, and he is also the author of the New York Times best-selling book, Wastewater Management, published by Dun and Bradstreet. If you have not got your hands on this page turner, I strongly recommend you go out and get one, especially if you're having any trouble sleeping at night. This book will fix you. I remember when you told me you were going to be writing this book, and he said Dun and Bradstreet's publishing it. I said, really, what's it on? And Tim goes, Wastewater Management. And I went, okay, well, you are an authority on that, but yeah, I don't know about seeing that one on the New York Times best-selling list. But Tim, tell me just if you can a bit, okay? When I first met you, you were doing training on wastewater management. You were doing training on really exciting things. You and Perry Morris, like asbestos abatement. And I can even remember thinking, oh my gosh, can you imagine trying to bring any life into those, pardon the pun, incredibly dry sessions? So when did you start, I guess, realizing that you needed to start bringing some humor into the presentations that you were doing? And just give us a bit of the history or a bit of the background on that.
Yeah, thanks for that. I honestly, I thought way back in the beginning when I was getting people to come into the session and they would ask, can I just sign the roster and go? I was like, wow, I'm already getting 0 or maybe even -5 engagement. And it was always like, well, wow, what did I do? Did I do something to deserve this? And so I was like, well, let's go ahead and see what we can do. And I'd always say, let's have an open mind. But then throughout the training, whether compliance training in the very beginning was for me, HAZWOPER, which is a chemical emergency response class, and some contractor training that I did just before I met you. And I learned real quick that those folks that were always leaning on their hand, and it was almost before cell phones too. So people were just like, they didn't have a cell phone to spend their time wasting in a training class. And so I learned real quick that if I said something funny or I did something in the class, it actually pulled more engagement. And then I was able to study later on that those folks that were engaged actually had more retention when I returned. And they said, I remember what you said about this. And so I've been actually using those two things from the very, very beginning. I'm saying 96, 97, 98. Larry, if you remember, that was when foils or transparencies converted over to using digital delivery. And I know we've got a story about that with you, but still, in regards to what I was doing, it was dry compliance training, and I wasn't getting a lot of engagement. And then later in 99 and 2000, I started to use other elements. And I'm gonna quote a friend of mine. Her name is Linda Tapp. She uses a term called gamification. I started incorporating fun activities, and I started to see an increase in engagement. And then when I returned the year after to do the refresher training, I also saw retention. And so now those two things are extremely important to me. And so whether it's humor or gamification activities, anything in the instructional design that can actually increase those two things, that's what I look for. So, and I found a bigger bang for my buck with humor. And humor can mean a lot of things. So humor could be, having fun in class. And safety professionals, typically, if they've gotten a persona at their facility, it's usually a safety cop or somebody that's there to provide direction and compliance. And their main focus is compliance. But when you start focusing on the people and you start having fun, I truly believe it's contagious. And when it becomes contagious, people start to reach out to you and they become friends. And that, to me, soft skills like that, that's where it's at. And it's hard to develop over time, but I'll tell you, I've gotten more engagement and retention just because of those things. And that's what's important to me.
Yeah, one of the things I always, well, when you first did it, I was kind of like, what's up with this, right? And I watched you do it over and over and over again. But you'd be asking about common injuries. How many of you have had stitches? How many of you have sprained an ankle before? You'd even say, how long do you have to put the ice on? And then the people would, sort of 15, 20 minutes, whatever. And he goes, so you guys obviously know, right? Now, has anybody got a burn on their forearm right from the oven? And invariably somebody would put their hand up, and then you would do this thing. You say the person's name was Linda or Kathy or whoever it was. And you'd say, okay, so how many of you agree that Kathy should now be the new class president? And everybody would laugh and clap their hands. And he'd go, okay, Kathy, you heard the vote. You're the new class president. Now, and then you'd say, now you don't have to do very much. And you'd give her one, all you've got to do now is count the hands for the next question or something like that, right? But I used to sit at the back with Kevin Cobb, and Kevin did have a natural gift for humor and timing. He was kind of like Ron White, if you remember, the comedian, everybody. Very, very Texan, but really funny. And he'd just look at me and he'd roll his eyes and he goes, He gets a laugh with that thing every time, Larry, every time. And I said, exactly, Kevin, every time. It's like more predictable, more reliable than any of this stuff that you and I do. And he'd shake his head going, yeah, but it's just like a cheap trick. And I'm going, but that's the point, Kevin. You don't have to be Ron White to do what Tim does. And he gets more engagement than we're getting. He's got the whole class with him right now. Look at him. And he'd kind of shake his head and he'd go, well, I don't know if I could pull that off. And I'd say, oh, for heaven's sakes, Kevin, any of us could pull that off. That's the point, right? And it was also, Tim, if I could, one of the things I was kind of hoping the audience might be able to take away from you too, which was just a couple of those things that were so tried and proven and work so well. Now, just for everybody listening, Tim and I have presented as keynote presenters at the National Safety Council Professional Development Conference in Indianapolis. There were about 2,300 folks that came out to listen to us, or at least to listen to Tim. I'm not sure. But we had the highest attendance on day 2 for a keynote that they'd ever had up until then. Tim has presented with me at the ASSP regionals. We did a talk on the third dimension of risk. I think that was the third dimension of risk assessment, Tim.
Yeah.
And I remember, I'd go through my intro spiel, and then Tim would walk out there and he'd go, and now enter the skeptical safety professional. And that one line, you got the biggest laugh just about of the day with that one line there. But basically, you were emulating what everybody was thinking out there too, as safety professionals. So was that one of the things that you tried to do, Tim, was just figure out kind of what everybody was thinking and then turn that into a statement, joke, or, some sort of humor piece as well?
Yeah, I think so. I think what you can do is what I end up doing is taking what somebody says or what I feel like somebody's feeling and then capitalizing on that. And then what you'll end up seeing is you're building a bridge. So in thought, you're trying to build a bridge, and it's relationship. And that's all you're trying to do is build those relationships. And when you come out and try to say something that you think people are feeling or saying, or, what they want to say, but they don't. And then when you say it out loud for them, they immediately connect. And that feeling of engagement in safety professionals is huge. But there's a couple of things I want to do, Larry. Just number one, I want to say I'm very grateful for Kevin Cobb. And when,
oh yeah, me too. I mean,
I've learned a lot of humoristic points from Kevin, and to this day, he's one of the best on the spot thinkers when it comes to, when he used to do the crossing the arms for habits, he'd say, I'd wait. That always, for whatever reason, I'd see it 25 times and I'd still crack up. And then also our good friend Jack, who was on your, Larry Wilson Live, Jack, I'd say, if I had to give you an explanation of the difference between a safety professional and a comedian, that would be me and Jack would be the comedian. And I'm always laughing at whatever Jack says. And it's just his tone, his demeanor, and his delivery. As a matter of fact, when Jack used to introduce me as an MC of the workshops, he would say Tim is he's the author of Safety and Health and Security in Wastewater. And he said the same thing. It's a page turner. And everybody would laugh at what he'd say. And then I'd come up and I said, one thing is guaranteed, that book, even though it's wastewater, is still full of crap. And I would have to explain to everybody, and I'm sorry, it's not necessarily full of crap, but it's one of those things as safety professionals we do. We write, we get into our mechanism. But the point you made earlier about, making a point, something that they can gather, a tool, is that even though we've got serious things to do, it doesn't mean that you can't do that and have fun doing it, because since it's so serious, I mean, I'm looking at the Joker from Batman. Why so serious? Well, you could be serious at your job, but that doesn't mean you can't have fun doing it. And I've learned a lot from both of those two, Jack, specifically the workshop team, Jack, Gary, Danny, and Kevin, and yourself.
Well, first of all, thanks for that, Tim. And again, I'm not a comedian either. I mean, when I was in Hollywood, one of the people at one of my acting classes was Yakov Smirnoff. And I had to actually, as the exercise, do a stand-up comedy routine. And Yakov was helping me with it. And he said, Larry, he said, you tell really funny stories, but that's not what stand-up comedy is. Stand-up comedy is a joke and it's a rhythm, and it's a joke and it's a rhythm, and you got to keep people laughing. I mean, you got funny stories, but they go on and on and on and on, right? He said, that's not stand-up comedy. And by the time Yakov got done with me, I was done with stand-up comedy. Like there was no illusions that I had what it takes to sort of be that. But you started off with, in working with us. You would do this little class president thing. You would do a few other things to get the group engaged and engaged positively. Like it wasn't like you were just, reading people's names off the name tag and calling them by name and making people worried that, oh God, he's going to pick me next time. I better pay attention so that, I'm listening. It wasn't a negative thing at all. You had everybody just drawn in. But how much, I guess what I want to get at, Tim, is how much time went by from, when I first met you at the Southwest Safety Council in 2003, and you were you were none too thrilled with this whole behavior-based safety stuff, human error stuff at all. You were pretty much compliance driven by the book type of guy, and you were organizing this whole conference too. So, you had to come into the room, you had to introduce me, you had to stay there. And by the end of the session, I'll give you this, you had come around more than probably anybody in the audience, right? But you worked with us for a couple years after that. When did you start doing your keynote presentation, humor and safety? Because you've done that. Like in North America, we'll get into how many times in a second, but I know you've done it in West Africa, South Africa, you've done it in the Middle East. I'm not sure about conferences in Europe or in Asia. I think maybe there was one in Singapore. But you've been running that talk, humor and safety, for what, 8-9 years as a keynote?
Yeah, I was gonna say it might be even a little bit longer than that. It was roughly when I met you. I started using techniques that I had started gaining roughly just before that, right around the 2000 year. The year 2000 was kind of a pinnacle year for me because I started incorporating activities, and from a bleak compliance class to here are things that we're going to be doing. And it wasn't necessarily because I was trying to fill the 8 hours. It was because I saw that there were, the proverbial air quotes, the proverbial light bulb clicking over people's heads. And when I started getting more of that through the activities versus just straight lecture, I started to peek into the National Training Laboratories training pyramid. And your brother and I had a conversation about this when I first met him in Belleville.
The one from Bethel, Maine there, the learning pyramid.
Yeah, that's the one. We had a conversation about it. And it was something that, from an instructional design, that at the very bottom of this pyramid, you actually want to get people to teach what you're trying to do. And the only way to do that is if they had fun doing it, to me. There's many other ways that you can do it, but if they're engaged and they're having fun, I figured out in 2001, that would be the time where I could start doing a presentation called the Humor and Safety. Now, the actual solidification of the presentation.
Tim, do you want to maybe just very quickly tell everybody, like it starts sort of with lecture at 5% and reading at 10%.
Yeah, sure.
Audio visual. I can't remember all the percentages on the way down, but I know the very last one, 90% was the teaching others.
Yeah, I'm going to provide a chat or a link that people can download the article that I wrote. But the top of it is 5% engagement or retention is lecture. So in other words, when you're presenting information, the worst way to present is lecture. That's going to get you 5% engagement or retention. But at the very bottom of this is 90% engagement and retention. And is that actually getting people to go out and teach what you actually just taught them? And if they're able to go out and talk about it, not necessarily smartly, but at least have a concept of what they're delivering, then you actually get them to use it a lot more. And that's 90%. That's important. Everything in between is hands-on, demonstration, audio, visual. Those things actually start to increase more engagement. But I'm giving you the full end of the spectrum. You've got lecture, 5%, and then you've got 90%, and that is full on getting them to teach or talk to other people about what they just learned. Now, that's a huge component. So I'm going to send the chat over to Mike, and then hopefully Mike can place that into the actual chat box so that everybody can get a copy of that article.
Right. Thanks for that. I should have been introducing Mike and Mackenzie in the background in case anything technical goes wrong. It's all their fault. But they will post your questions up, everybody, and we'll hopefully have a good 10-15 minutes at the end to try to get to some of those questions. So Tim, you started a long time ago doing this presentation on humor and safety.
Yeah.
And like I said before, and I was trying to be, neutral, not necessarily kind or subversive, but like you not necessarily blessed with comedic timing, or like you and I, neither of us are going to quit and go become stand-up comics. Okay, I can tell funny stories. You can also tell really funny stories as well too. But like I said, I don't think with you especially, I don't think people miss the point either. Like there's you're always coming back to the point. But can you sort of just talk a bit about some of the content in humor and safety? Like, okay, so say for instance somebody's listening right now and they're going, okay, so I don't consider myself to be a super funny person. I'm not the one that's always got a whole bunch of people crowded around at the cocktail party listening to me talk and laugh, and I'm not the center of attention usually. Don't consider myself to be really funny. Can you sort of go through the presentation a bit maybe, or give us some ideas about what can you do so that you can bring some humor into your presentations if you're not necessarily, Jeff Foxworthy or Ron White or, some other really accomplished stand-up comedian type of person? Like, how can you go about looking at, your presentation and then adding the humor to it?
Yeah, I got to tell you, just kind of go backwards a little bit. Jack Jackson, a good friend of both of ours, he is something that he's someone that people gravitate towards, and he'll tell you the way it is, and he'll give you that voice and that stern look, but he'll also let you know that it's okay to have a conversation because he's just relaxed at his approach. And I don't necessarily take the cues from Jack, but I've learned a lot from Jack. I kind of look at him as a mentor. But when he told his Walmart story in Belleville in 2007, you were actually asking for the best stories that provide the best comedic effort. And I heard his story for the first time, and I was just taken aback the way he told it, the delivery, the essence. And then, if you haven't heard the Walmart story, you should go listen to, Larry Wilson Live, or you should go to the Safe Talk with Safe Star. That's recorded. We've got it if you need it. But anyway,
I bet you both of us could do it almost word for word right now. The Walmart.
I think so. But
old man bending down, looking at me like this,
honestly, I didn't have any of those. I didn't have any of those accolades. I couldn't do that for myself, and I probably still couldn't. But I gravitated towards Jack in the way he delivered that. So I added one of those elements into the presentation, and that's good storytelling. And although Jack would be probably the best mentor in SafeStar to help develop a specific story, storytelling is where it's at because people can relate. And I learned a lot from you at the very beginning, because one of the questions is, has anybody ever run a red light? And just to give everybody a humorous perspective of that, I asked the same question. And then I just turn around and ask, when you run the red light, what's the first two words out of your mouth? That's not a comedic effort. It's just to get everybody to say, I'm embarrassed, and I'm going to say, oh crap, or maybe something else. And immediately that relationship right there gets me to get more engagement. So that's one of them. How can you take what somebody says and turn around and make it a relationship thing So storytelling, relationship building, those are two big elements. And you can develop relationships based on storytelling and the way you do it. And a third element is taking what somebody said, it doesn't matter if it's storytelling or delivery, and go ahead, just like you said, somebody that burnt their arm on the forum, there's out of 80 people in the room, there's guaranteed to be somebody in the room that's going to have a burn mark across their forearm. And we can predict that, which is the best part about Safe Start. It's predictable. So when you predict something like that to occur, and honestly, Larry, there's never been a time we've done a workshop where somebody didn't have that burn mark. So it happens all the time. And you can actually just go up to them and you can just get connected with them because, even though we might not have a permanent burn mark across our arm, but we probably have been in a situation where we burnt ourselves sticking our hand in the oven. And what you just did there was build a bridge between two people because it's happened to you. Sometimes, and unfortunately, safety professionals take the stance that they never make mistakes. And we've had a couple of those in our workshops where they just say out loud, I'm a safety professional. I don't make mistakes. I lead by example. And going back to Jack's had to deal with that very specific situation. Whereas you tell a safety professional you've never made a mistake is almost comedic in its statement. But if they say they've never made a mistake, you can turn that around. Now, I wouldn't pick on them and throw them under the bus, which is another element of the presentation. You don't shame or judge people based on that notion.
Right.
You actually take what they say and capitalize on it, and you just go to the other group and say, hey, is anybody here also the same way? It's not that you're actually picking on that person, but in a way, you actually get them to realize that we've all made several mistakes. Case in point, when we ask the question, how many mistakes have you made in your lifetime? It's comedic in itself. And you'll inevitably get one person who's been divorced to say, I made the one mistake. I didn't set that up. They said it themselves. And that's kind of comedic in how it's delivered and tone. And Danny says it best, timing. Those two things alone in a presentation go hand in hand with a great bit of humor. And so the relationship factor, storytelling, the way you tell stories, those are all elements of the presentation. It's been refined over the years with my contamination of you and Kevin and Jack and other folks in our group. It's grown and it's gotten so much better. And one of the biggest element is that you don't want to kill them by PowerPoint because so many people have been inundated by PowerPoint for so long. So the last element is change it up. Don't do what they expect. And if they come into the room expecting a certain thing and you deliver that certain thing, then they come to realize that safety training is just going to be the same thing over and over again. So you've got to eliminate doing the same thing over and over again. So that just pretty much sums up the entire presentation.
Well, I mean, we could spend another hour, another show, Tim, talking about how well you use PowerPoint, or the different versions of it. I can't remember the other one, Prezi or whatever it is. Yeah, I think. But I remember also too, though, that you didn't just rely on the, if you will, stand-up humor. Let's make Lisa the class president. Building those bridges. You would also have some great visuals in your PowerPoint. Like I remember when you did the BBS, the bad breath of safety, and you'd show an older guy with about 3 or 4 teeth left, the rest of them in various stages of decay to, complete disintegration. And you say, so do you figure this guy has bad breath? And I mean, it was a fairly gross slide in a way, but belly laughs all through the room when you put that up. So I know it's always difficult for me to ask these questions without it sounding so much like prosecution leading the witness here, Tim, but because I know how you do things. I've worked with you. We've built presentations together. So what we do, everybody, is Tim and I will lay out it's almost like laying out the script, laying out the track, the linear progression of the presentation. Okay. So we're going to start off with this, then we're going to move to this, then you're going to enter the stage, and say this, and then we're going to do this, and then we're going to conclude with that. So we've got the storyline laid out and the points, like in other words, here's how we're going to start. These are the points we're going to make in the conclusion that we're going to drive home. And then we go back and we look at the whole thing, almost like a meal, going, okay, you've got the meat, you've got the vegetables, you got the salad. Okay, now where are we going to sprinkle in this humor, right? And we've even done it with ourselves. Like, in other words, the third dimension of risk assessment, I would start off, and then you would enter the stage saying, now enter the skeptical safety professional. And I remember at the NSC, you're talking about most dangerous things not equal in the worst injuries. And then when you say, how many of you have been, behind the wheel of a car or motorcycle going over 100 miles an hour, 160 kilometers an hour, and everybody just about in the room put their hand up. And then you said, so who are you texting? You got the big laugh. And then I walk on the stage saying, I said, you can't be texting anybody at 100 miles an hour because you got to be looking for cops, right? And so, I mean, we would choreograph even where we came in for the humor. But maybe if you could just go back to the 101 part for everybody, lay your presentation out and then start looking at where could you put a funny, or tell me how you go about doing it. But, where's a visual, where's a funny story? And how much of that do you put in? How do you figure out how much Tabasco, how much salt, how do you do all that part?
Thank you. That's an incredible question. And I will tell you, in instructional design, you definitely want to make sure you do a kind of a quasi needs assessment before. It doesn't matter if it's an hour presentation or a webinar. It doesn't matter if it's 8 or 40 hours. You still need to understand who your audience is. So, Larry, you were right. I delivered this in West Africa, South Africa, and Kuwait, literally on the same trip. And every single location had different audiences, even though they're all safety professionals and they have different focuses. The culture is different. And so I had to do a little bit of research before going in. So I'd say very first thing you need to do is a needs assessment. Find out who they are, what they're doing, who the audience is. That's a great way to get to the beginning.
Get the lay of the land as best you can. Okay, right?
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to give a mad shout out to Daniel Osadie in Nigeria, who gave me a lay of the land for Nigeria. And then Kuwait, a good friend of mine, Ashok Galaparty, he got me into it.
You can't get the people in Nigeria laughing, you better pack it in.
That's yeah. And so if I didn't have those up front before I got to those locations, I don't think I would have been able to get anybody to laugh. And I had to switch up the tone and the delivery of some of the important parts because they wouldn't laugh like people in North America would. And so I had to make sure I understood it. And you're right. You use some good analogies there, the meat and the potatoes, and then sprinkling on Tabasco. And again, to give some kudos to Jack, he always talks about the ice cream sundae. You got the ice cream, which is the development of the project or the program, what you're delivering. And then you'll sprinkle on what you need, the chocolate, whatever it is that you need. And so in storytelling, if you're going to do that, you got to make sure that you have a point. And if you don't have a point or there's no tool or no takeaway, then the story is moot. And 9 times out of 10, I've gone out and audited trainers on the OSHA Training Institute side, and a lot of them will just add funny video clips for the sake of having laughter, and that doesn't prove a point. And the video, if you're going to develop that and put it into your meat and potatoes, that sprinkle, whatever it is, you got to make sure there's a point. And so don't do it in spite of safety. I always use the term, make sure you're doing it for the sake of safety and not in spite of safety. So that's helpful, and that'll help you develop not necessarily just the agenda, but also the finished deliverables. And I'm going to give a mad shout out to Kristen. Thank you for the airport story comment. I always too bring in foreshadowing storytelling, and I'll tell a story in the very beginning, but to prove my point about the content and the toolbox that they have to reach into, I always close it by revisiting the story that I started with. So the foreshadowing and storytelling is that you deliver the point. And my meeting with you in Mesa, Arizona is literally the point that I begin with that story. It's literally just that. if I didn't meet you, Larry, I wouldn't have been able to self-trigger on that. And so at the very end, instead of going home on the day after Christmas, it's, you always refer to it as the rest of the story. And
Right.
I'd like for everybody here to just remember, if you start off with a story, it makes a lot of sense to prove your point or the takeaway for that session to finish and close the loop with the same finished portion of that story. So that would kind of wrap up the design. And then the delivery, during the
Tim, if I
delivery.
can, let me just, I just want to punctuate a couple things you said there. One of them is, everybody, not just to use a funny video clip, like airlift it in and then let it go. Like, you've got to set it up. It's got to have a point and context to what the overall point you're making. And then it accentuates it, hopefully with a bit of humor, or a bit of whatever you want to call it, voltage, I guess, in some cases. The same thing in terms of, you're not just going to try to show one funny picture or one outrageous picture after another. You're going to try to give them a question or something like that, like, do you think this guy's the luckiest guy on earth? And then you show the clip or something. And then you show another one and say, well, what about this guy? Do you think this guy's luckier? I mean, but it's never just gratuitous humor. I think that's the thing. All of the stuff that you bring in, it's funny, but it relates to what you're saying. It isn't just, it isn't just, oh, I found a funny slide, so I'm putting it up here.
Mm-hmm.
Or I found a funny video clip, so I'm going to throw it in. You've got to find a way to make it relate to what you're doing. Or quite frankly, you got to leave it out, right? Like, if it's, maybe save it for another presentation or another day. But everything's got to be connected. All of the dots have got to be connected. And I think that part you do really, really well, is also, like, in other words, it's not just, you don't just find something funny. Like, I found things funny before, like that video clip, the luckiest people on earth. But then I had to figure out, okay, where are you going to put this? Where are you going to put this so that it makes the most sense and you kind of maximize the entertainment? The other question I wanted to ask you, Tim, is just using a bit of neuroscience here as well. The audience should probably know that 20 minutes of trying to absorb information is all that your average human being can take. And so you now need to give their brain a chance to download that into short-term memory. So it's a great time for a 1 minute or 2 minute video clip, or a story, or something, from some sort of change of pace, so that they're not just trying to absorb this stuff. So do you actually go back to your presentations and sort of make sure that every 15 or 20 minutes you're giving people that opportunity, usually with humor is what I've seen you do, to download what's in their hippocampus?
Yeah, for sure. I know the neuroscience in having a conversation with that, it's more like 10 or 15 minutes for me, Larry. I want to make sure that I've got something in there that keeps them engaged. So that helps with the full sponge absorbency. If it's full after 20 minutes, then there's got to be a way for them to release. And in order for them to release, I'm always looking for things that, I know this is stuff that you don't learn in university or high school. And so they don't teach you soft skills 101. And as well as I do, I've got somebody at home that looks out for me. And so Sheila, when she comes on and she might listen to a webinar, or she might come to my presentation, she's always willing to give me feedback. And one thing I learned from you, Larry, was in terms of behavior, you only get one behavioral feedback per marriage. And that laughter right there, that laughter comes into play because it's true. And there have been times where I would see something, she would see something, we try to say something to each other. But when we get full or absorbed with too much information, what we end up having a tendency to do is turn the switch off and kind of goes towards something else. Red dots on your phone is one of those things that it gets me distracted. And so to pull them back in, I always try to share something that's personal. And recently I've been sharing video clips of me running to first base in baseball. And I know it's comical because I'm 50 years old. I'm not 25 anymore. And I don't think I can actually sprint to first base. I've got to jog, and I'm hoping to get a base hit and not have to run something out. And people get a laugh. They get a laugh out of that. And then 15 minutes later, there might be a comment about baseball. Jeremiah here mentioned in the chat, I hear you, Obi-Wan. I'm always constantly striving to use an analogy in Star Wars, or maybe even something that's important. And it doesn't have to be Star Wars for you, but whatever is important to you, your family, Sheila, in my case, instances of Star Wars, it doesn't matter. You can always gather or use something 10 or 15 minutes into the presentation, 15 minutes later again, as long as you're incorporating something that's very valuable or personal to you and then still make a point. Yeah, you can get them still engaged after 20 minutes of that. So if you want to keep them going and not get them distracted by something else, let them squeeze that sponge, but also bring them back with something that's important personally to you.
Right on, right on. So you lay the presentation out and get the linear component down, if you will. You know, the like kind of if you're if you were making a video, you lay the audio track down. Okay, get the script right, get the words, get the content right. Then once you've got that, go back and start looking at, okay, you know, have I got a break every 10 or 15 minutes so that they can sort of download a bit of this and absorb a bit more? Because I mean, we are, like I said at the very beginning, don't ever miss the point that you're there to train people and make a change, right? You know, like it's not entertainment. There is a purpose to this session. That's why the company is doing it. That's why they're spending the money. The purpose of the entertainment is so that you can do and get through to the people. They don't disengage, they don't turn off, etc. Okay, so we got the basic soundtrack down there. Now you're looking at, where can I put in some visuals that are funny? Where can I put in, you know, a video maybe clip that's funny? You know, how do I do, you know, a bit of audience engagement to make sure, you know, that I've got them with me? And you do that part at the beginning, I think, better than anybody I've ever seen in this profession. And I've seen a lot of presenters over the last 30 plus years. And then you've also got the wrap up, right? Like you've got the conclusion, which, if you can, coming back to bookend the original story that you opened up with, if it's there, like the Paul Harvey, the rest of the story, that sort of stuff, connecting all of that those dots full circle, also I think makes it a nice convenient bundle for the people to kind of take away with them. Okay, so for those of you listening here right now, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to sum up all of the serious important points here, because I think what we ought to do, everybody, since the topic and the title is humor and safety, is before we open it up to questions and answers from the audience and all that, I would, and I've heard it before, but I still want to hear it again. I think it's your funniest story, Tim. I mean, you've got so many, but if you could maybe just talk about the yellow fever card, tell us that story, and then show us how you make the point at the end.
Well, I got to reach for something.
Well, and the prop, we didn't talk about the props. That's another thing. Handheld props are your friend. They are your friend when you are presenting, for sure. Yes,
for sure. And you know what, animation goes a long way too. So if you're normally standing in one position or posting, then, you know, moving your hands, extemporaneously move left or right, those are all great things to help too. But Larry invited me to go to Nigeria, and I was very grateful for that Nigerian trip. It was a great experience and had a great host. But I had to go to South Africa after that, and the South Africa trip I was looking forward to. And I looked up all the requirements because I was going from Nigeria to South Africa, but I was looking at it from a North American perspective and not as a person traveling to South Africa from another country. And so I was getting ready to leave Nigeria, and every time you travel to Nigeria, you end up getting a host, and particularly you get you get a sponsor. I'm going to use that name, sponsor. That's a great word, sponsor. And so the sponsor brought me into the airport, and I got up to the South African Airlines ticket counter, and they had asked for my passport and my yellow card. And I made a joke. I said, "I'm sorry, I don't play soccer. What is that?" And they said, "Football, you mean?" And I said, "Well, oh, look at Lucas. Lucas is here. Lucas was with me. So it's just fun that we met in South Africa. That was crazy." Anyway, so I said, "I don't have a yellow card. What is that?" And they said, "You don't have a yellow fever card?" And I said, "No, I'm American." And I said it with that tone, like as if I demand to be let through this gate because I'm American. And they said, "No, sir, you're not."
By the way, everybody, if you happen to be American, there's no problem with being a proud American or a proud Canadian, but hopefully what you're gleaning out of this is that there's a time and a place for that. This might not be the time, and it might not be the place.
Not the time. It's not the time. Anyway, my escort looked at me, and I'm kind of down and out, like, what's happening? And say, "Sir, you need to step into the quarantine square." Has anybody ever been into the quarantine square? I'm going to ask in the last 2 years, you probably have been in a quarantine square, maybe your house. I don't care where it is, but I got put in this little turnstile area of a quarantine square. And the lady said, "You're going to have to be stuck here in Nigeria for 14 days until you can clarify or verify that you've been cleared of yellow fever." And now I'm like, oh no, I got to go to South Africa. I got to go to Dubai.
This is before the pandemic, everybody. This is like.
This is March 2019. And my good friend Lucas was there to meet me in South Africa. So anyway, I said, "I don't know what that is." My escort, my escort sponsor looked at me and said, "Hey, what's going on?" I said, "They said I don't have a yellow card. They're not going to let me go. And I got to be quarantined in the country for 14 days. He goes, "Hey, stand here for 10 minutes. I'll be right back." 10 minutes goes by. I'm kind of freaking out, and I'm looking around going, "Where's this guy at?" Another 20 minutes goes by. So a grand total of a half an hour. And I'm like, oh no, this is not good. I'm not sure what's happening. And literally waited for 40 minutes thinking, I don't know what's happening. He comes up, he goes, "Hey, how's it going?" I said, "Well, you tell me." I'm kind of like, "What's going on?" And he's like, "Let me know if you hear your name in a couple of minutes." And sure enough, you heard it in the Nigerian airport. "Passenger Page-Bottorff, please report to the South African airlines ticket counter." And I'm like, oh boy. So I stepped out of the quarantine square and I get up to the ticket counter and they hand me my passport back just like this. I said, "You're good to go, sir." I said, "Wait, what? You're good to go. Here's your passport. Here's your yellow card. Thank you very much for supplying it." I said, "What?" I looked inside and there was this yellow card. I have no idea where it came from. And I'm very grateful that I was able to get out of Nigeria to go to South Africa. But now I'm looking inside, and inside this yellow card, it actually says that I received the vaccine, and it was signed by a doctor. And I received that vaccine 14 days before I arrived in Nigeria. And now I'm going, wow, I'm very grateful that I had an escort. I had a sponsor, so to speak. And so now I'm able to get in. They took my fever. I went through customs. And quite frankly, I almost panicked a little bit. I literally got into the quarantine square thinking that there's no way I'm going to get home. There's no way I'm going to make it to the other 4 locations I've got to go to. 14-day trip. There's no way this is going to work out. And I'm grateful. I got a chance to visit with Lucas. He met me in South Africa, and we kind of went on our way. But I literally made it through Nigeria thinking that I was good to go, and I super complacent about the whole thing. And to wrap things up with neuroscience, could it have been a lot worse? Oh, you better believe it. I could have been stuck in Nigeria for 14 days and not sure what I was going to do in those 14 days. Nevertheless, I did make it to South Africa, to Dubai, to Abu Dhabi, to Kuwait, and I got the chance to do all the work I needed to do.
And I remember the first time I heard you presenting this. I think it was ASSP. I'm not sure. Could have been NSC. And you asked that guy, your sponsor guy, whatever. And the guy's bigger than Tim, by the way. This sponsor guy, like he's a big man. And Tim said something to him about, "So what's your name?" And he goes, "They just call me the fixer."
That's exactly what he did.
You know, like kind of like Halston, just the one name, you know, Madonna, whatever, the fixer. Good. I'm good. Good. Thanks. Yeah, got the card. I'm good. Yeah. But I remember you saying too, you know, like, look, I checked into it, but I didn't really check. I didn't like look from, well, okay, now you're going from Nigeria to South Africa, not from America to South Africa. Just in case any of you are going there, by the way, you can go and come back. If you go and then go somewhere else, that's where you have to have the yellow fever card, right?
And that's the point I missed. Absolutely.
And I was so paranoid from listening to Tim's story that I got the yellow fever shot, even though I knew the last time I was only going from Abuja to Lagos. But I thought, well, maybe if you're just going somewhere else, even in Nigeria, you need a yellow fever card. And I'm not so sure my fixer guy is going to be quite as capable as Tim's fixer guy. So I'm just going to see if I can't fix this all myself before we even head off, right? Because it's a little intimidating getting to a country where you have to have like a bodyguard who's got an armed weapon and, you know, potentially another escort car where they have machine guns. And you're trying to say things like, you know, I'm not, first of all, that important. I'm not that rich. And I'm a safety professional. So usually most people ignore me, if you want to know the truth, really. Like I have to stand on my head and spit wooden nickels, and I have to be funny, and I've got to have lots of good visuals just to get people to listen to me. So you really don't need to worry. Like I don't cause a lot of trouble or a lot of waves wherever I go. But yeah, these are your escorts. This is your security guard, and he is armed, so don't worry. And you're like, it's not usually what happens before don't worry. You know, that's almost like, you know, a recipe for starting to worry and starting to get paranoid. But that story, Tim, I mean, I love that story. Love the story about the Denver airport as well. So, you know, I think for all of those of you listening like me who, you know, maybe you didn't get a one-on-one lesson from Yakov Smirnoff, but all I'll tell you right now is that you got to be very gifted and very talented to be a good stand-up comedian. And most of us aren't blessed with all of that, but that doesn't mean that you can't make a decent presentation, even if the material is as dry as asbestos, literally, and bring some humor into it. And some other tips and some techniques to get some engagement. So one of the things Tim mentioned was find an injury that you know is going to have happened to somebody in the room. If you want one that's guaranteed, how many of you have either fallen asleep or almost fallen asleep at the wheel? You're going to see 90% of the hands go up in the air. Now, I do remember the first time I asked that was after I'd fallen asleep at the wheel, nearly killed myself, except for the seatbelt, thankfully, was on, saved my life. And then I've got two black eyes. So, you know, you got to kind of deal with that when you're doing safety training in the front of the room. I mean, people are looking at you and they're kind of giving you are you going to tell us what happened? Because, I mean, it's pretty obvious. And so, you know, I told him, you know, I fell asleep at the wheel. And I said, how many of you have ever fallen asleep or almost fallen asleep at the wheel? And the first time I said that, like over 90% of the hands in the room were up in the air. And I was just looking at him. And I mean, I know I totally gave it away going, oh my gosh, I thought it was just me. It was everybody. And I remember the next time I said, how many of you have been hurt because you were rushing before? And again, 90% of the hands up in the air. And I remember going, wow, we should really be talking about this kind of stuff. You know, we really should be if it's that common. But find something like that. You'll get everybody to put their hands up. And then a real easy thing that I've seen you do, Tim, is just say, like, to the lady with the burn on her arm, can you tell us what happened? And then she, you know, quickly, I was reaching into the oven. I was in a whatever it was, usually hurry, right? You know,
Yeah.
didn't get the oven mitts, or the oven mitts weren't up long enough, right? And I burned myself on the upper grill. And then you say, how many of you have done that? Bunch of hands in the air. And then you say, okay, so how many of you are in favor of making Linda the new class president? And that'll get you a laugh every time, right? I mean, so there's a few of those kind of, I mean, I'm sure, well, I'll ask you, Tim, do you mind if people steal your stuff?
Yeah, I'd say yes, because we use the terminology steal shamelessly. I think that come from Jack or maybe even Kevin a long time ago, but steal it. It's not that it's my stuff. It's stuff that I've actually learned over the years and seen other people do, or maybe I've created a couple of things that helped me out in the very beginning. And but also make sure you come back to the point. And so the point of that story, even though as comical as it is and the error that I made, bring it back to the point. I have a tendency to review and look at contracts and look at terms and conditions, but 90% of the time, especially when it comes to an application on my phone, I just click yes, I've reviewed those terms and that agreement, as opposed to actually reviewing it. So I've become a better detailed person. And there's another story that Larry and I could share later on that Larry was there to bail me out on, but it's just
$300, Tim. It's okay. I've forgotten all about it though.
Anyways, come back to that point. If you want to have fun, come back to that point and make sure you wrap it up with that. But in a summary, you said it right, Larry. Find any element you can, and it does take time. You can't just come up and be, a humor and safety person overnight. Think of those things that develop relationships, but always, always, always use increased engagement and retention as your primary reason why you're doing it. And then you'll always find out that the point will come back to you, and then it's something that you'll deliver to summarize and close out those sessions.
Yeah, and it's also a real help too. Like if you want to stick to serious points, make sure you get them laugh. Like, I mean, I used to actually tell people the sequence is, tell a story that it's happened to everybody, then tell one that's similar that happened to you that could have been serious that wasn't, then tell one about somebody else where they weren't lucky. And then you've got to have one kind of funny story to bring the room back to as well too, because you can't really just leave them on somebody just died. Yeah. Or somebody was just dismembered or whatever it was. You've got to be able to come back, bring the mood back up, and then go on with some of the teaching stuff again. But, if you do want that real serious one in there, make sure you've got it sort of sandwiched between some humor as well, too. I mean, Kevin, again, was the best for this. He'd get you laughing and laughing and laughing until you just totally dropped your guard. You didn't have any walls up at all. And then it would be just right between the eyes. And it would be just like, oh, that wasn't funny.
Yeah.
And then he'd have that way to bring the room back up again. So again, everybody, we're not saying it's entertainment and stand-up comedy. It's how to use the entertainment and the comedy so that you can stick those serious points, if you've got them to stick, or serious learning, teaching points like education. You need to know about the anchor points. You need to know lower explosive limit testing. So, there's stuff that we got to make sure they do here. And the humor and the funny visuals and all the rest of it is so that you can make all of that happen. It's not the other way around where people all just give you tens. I can remember telling this to all of the consultants going, you care about how many tens you got on the evaluation, and so did I. But in the long run, 6 months from now, did that company get 50, 60, 70% decreases in injuries and serious injuries? That'll be whether or not you ever go back. They won't care. They could care less how many tens you got. So don't ever forget that part about your training too, is that, it's about what did they learn. Your job is to make that learning easy and fun and open so that they receive it. It isn't so that they can remember. The only thing they remember at the end was the funny story about Tim at the airport in Denver. They actually remember the point that you brought it back to, which is, if I hadn't learned how to self-trigger, I would have been spending Christmas at the Denver airport.
That's right.
That kind of thing. I know I knew this would happen, Tim. Talking to you, like an hour would fly by, but we've got a few minutes, everybody. Mike, are there any questions that have come in that we could put up on the screen that hopefully Tim could take a shot at?
Kristen, thank you. I have to say the answer is no. I never got a yellow fever vaccination, but I guarantee if I'm going back to Africa, if Larry ever invites me back, I'm going to get that shot.
We'll get back there, Tim. We'll get back there. There's definitely a lot of work to be done, especially, when you go to places where a lot of the safeguard stuff that we take for granted, like fall arrest harnesses, flooring on scaffolds, things like that, little things. I remember them looking at me going, "Oh, but they're all really good, Larry." I said, "Well, of course they're all really good. I mean, anybody who wasn't would already be dead. So by definition, we are only looking at people up there who can be really good, okay? Because it's a one mistake per customer sort of event, right? But for those folks, obviously, eyes and mind on task, line of fire, balance, traction, grip, Tim, it becomes almost omnipotent, right? Like that's all they got, right? So if they don't have their eyes peeled and their wits about them, lots of bad stuff can happen, and lots of bad stuff does. So we'll be definitely going back there because things are moving there, and certainly in the Middle East as well. Now there's a place where you got to be careful about the humor that you do bring in and stuff like that too. Again, I found that it was no problem at all getting them to laugh, but I had to try to keep it a little more between the white lines. That's for sure. Not stray too far. Again, the funny visuals, the funny video clips interspersed. Not too many jokes about marriage and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, there's certainly pitfalls.
We might all, yeah. Anyhow, Mike, any more questions from the audience there? I know we had lots of comments and stuff from people.
Tons of good comments and people participating in the chat, but not too many questions. People have just been enjoying this. It's been super funny, guys. Thanks.
Oh God, you're welcome. You're welcome. Well, look, Tim, we are at the hour, and try to work one last joke in there. But if you look at the graph, the attendance in this show drops off like the Rock of Gibraltar after an hour. And so I'd like to just end maybe by saying, first of all, Tim, thanks very much for being on the show. Thanks also for all the hard work and effort. I mean, you're in Salt Lake City now, but I hope that day 2003 where you had to sit through that first presentation, you're not sitting there thinking, if I just have had to go somewhere, I could have had a real life, Instead, I got sucked into this vortex of human factors and critical errors that I've never been able to get out. But
well, Larry, I've never said this publicly, but I just want to say thank you for exposing me to that, because it's changed my life, honestly, frankly.
Well, I mean, all of us, Tim, our kids, our families, all of it. I mean, I don't know how long it took Sheila to come around. I mean, Donna was a number of years. I'll just say that. I remember reading Deliberate Risk and Error in the living room. I'm walking up the stairs with the laundry basket, and she just looks at me and she says, this is really good. You really think 4 million people bought it because it was crap? I mean, anyhow, but I think it's changed all of us. There's certainly a lot of folks still left to go, like you were saying, Africa, the Middle East. There's the whole Southeast Asia stuff there as well too. So we'll try to get you out and around the world over the next couple of years, best we can now that COVID's over. Tim and I, by the way, for anybody listening, will be speaking at the ASSP in Chicago next week. My session is technology. It's a double-edged sword, and it's at 8 a.m. on Tuesday morning. Tim, when's your session?
I got one
That's
on
so
Monday and
good.
Wednesday. So the first one is Soft Skills 101, and the second one is your safety management system out of the loop?
Okay, right on. Okay. And in the soft skills 101, are you going to be talking a bit about the humor stuff as well too?
There is the relationship factor and a bit of humor in there, having fun. Yep, for
Okay.
sure.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. Well, hopefully we'll see you in Chicago, everybody, if you happen to be there for the professional development conference. Tim, again, thank you so much for being on the show. And everybody, we are going to take a little bit of a break this summer. I'll be traveling through July. August is never super good. So kind of like the song says, we'll see you in September. Hopefully the guest I have lined up is Dr. Valerie Custis. She's the Senior Director for Health and Safety for Saint-Gobain. Wonderful person. I met her a couple of times, once in Berlin, once in Paris at her office. And she's going to be talking about not just managing one of the very biggest companies in the world. I think they have 400 and some odd thousand employees all over the place, but it's also one of the oldest companies in the world. It's over 400 years old. So should be some really interesting perspective that she can give us on, managing something that big with that much tradition and that much culture, and still trying to foster positive change. Because as we all know, the longer things have been around, the harder they are to change. So Tim, again, thank you very much for being on the show. Good luck with the rest of the week there in Salt Lake City. And again, thank you very much, everybody, for tuning in. And we'll see you in September for the next sort of episode of Larry Wilson Live. Okay.
Thanks, Larry. See you guys.
Have a great summer, everybody.
See y'all in Chicago, maybe.
Yeah. Or yeah, see you in Chicago.